Do you still have any insecurities surrounding that situation at Four Loko now that you're so far removed from it? I think people still might see you as the Four Loko guy instead of Koya.
Always,
right?
I've accepted that forever that will be the case, and that's okay because I can be I don't have to be only the one thing. At Koya, we're doing over 100 million in retail sales, but yeah, I still find insecurities. I mean, look, I follow along. I get high-level financials from the company, from Fusion. They're doing better than they've ever done, which is awesome, and I'm happy for them, and I'm happy for me because I'm still an owner in it. But that brings up like, well, is it better off without me? All these kind of things. But I can quickly get past those because I've been able to build another thing.
Welcome to Second Self, the podcast where we explore life beyond the thing that once defined us. I'm Daniel Snow, and in each episode we sit down with athletes, entrepreneurs, influencers, and other people who've had to reinvent themselves after their first act ended. Today we have Chris Hunter, who is famous for having founded Fusion Projects, the company behind the notorious drink Four Loko, as well as many other brands like Mamitas and Pirate Water. 6 months after leaving Fusion, Chris founded Koya, a plant-based beverage company where he's currently CEO. Both companies have done hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue and have been a staple in American culture. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
So this is cool because me and Chris have known each other for pretty closely for what, two years now?
Yeah, about 2 years.
So I like to start all these podcasts off with understanding where your desire for success came from, because we're going to be going full circle later on, and understanding kind of first self to second self, because I think especially as a lot of entrepreneurs, the reasons why we start are much different as we evolve.
Yeah.
And the things we want. So what do you think got you to when you first started Four Loko? Like, what was your inspiration?
Yeah, when I think back, I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. It's a very blue collar, town. My parents worked in factories. There wasn't the aspirational bar, like financially, was really like if you got a job at General Motors, right? Because it was safe and secure. You had benefits. You had that was the mentality. And I saw my stepdad, who worked at a steel mill, thinking he had the ideal situation, come home jobless one day because the steel mill had closed down. So this idea of like the safe route was suddenly shattered. On the flip side of that, I had one uncle who had an entrepreneurial spirit. He was a builder, so he was in construction, and he went out and started his own company. And I watched him generate some level of financial freedom, and it was really inspiring to me. My cousins and I always looked at him as the aspirational bar. And so I think if I think back to it, the earliest days, that's kind of the thing that I can attribute to really solidifying the idea that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But I also believe that many entrepreneurs, it's kind of ingrained in you from birth. And, I was the kid selling candy on the bus, or, I sold knockoff sunglasses at one point. I was always finding a way to generate money because I realized that money gave me options and maybe some freedoms that I didn't have. So a bit of ingrained and a bit of maybe not wanting what I saw really solidified that I was going to work for myself or create something on my own.
I can definitely, I still have vivid memories of selling gum on the school bus.
Yeah.
It's weird. I don't know why it's a thing, but it's safe to say, so the core of it is it came from a place of scarcity.
For sure.
So we'll definitely touch upon that later on. And after creating Four Loko, it was a pretty meteoric rise, right? You created it in college. How long did it take until, I guess, you made your first $1 million in that business?
So the popular narrative, which is slightly wrong, is that we started it in college. We are actually 3 college friends that ended up starting it, but it was in our young professional career. So maybe we were, 2-3 years out of college at that point. Myself and one of my partners were living in Chicago, and they had the other 2 had established themselves in normal careers. One was in banking, one was working for an industrial gas company doing sales. And so they had career paths, but I had somewhat bucked this trend or resisted, maybe stubbornly, maybe stupidly, the idea of any corporate gig. And if you look back, in college, I had this situation where I learned that you could do nightclub promotions and I could make money for bringing people to clubs and bars. And so I did that very successfully, created financial, it paid my way through college and gave me some financial flexibility. Like I bought a boat in college, which was obviously not common. But it also gave me this like confidence that I could do it. Well, when I moved to Chicago, I had no connections, no plan, and I was not going to go take this corporate job. And so I really just ran into severe debt. We can come back to that. But when I came up with the idea of what ultimately became Four Loko, it started as four, and it was caffeine and alcohol. I called the two guys, and we decided to start the company. But it wasn't immediate. It was 2 years of almost going out of business, of hiring one employee, firing them, not paying ourselves for a month. It was a struggle, which is not what you usually hear. Everyone hears the meteoric rise of it. But after we started the brand until I had the first $1 million in the bank, I would say was almost 5 years. And I remember the moment specifically that I went to the ATM, and my one partner was playing more of the CFO role and had made a distribution without telling us. And I went to take some money out and noticed that the balance was over $1 million. So it was a pretty amazing moment.
That is cool. How long did that moment of euphoria last for you?
In terms of the financial impact, I would say
Simply seeing the number.
Yeah, I would say probably that day.
It went away pretty quickly.
Went away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Now there was a lot of momentum in general with the business that was giving me confidence and euphoria about the potential, but it wasn't specifically pegged to that. It was pegged to what we could create.
Yeah. I remember that moment for myself. I was in the college parking lot walking to the gym, and it wasn't even a moment of euphoria. It was actually like a existential crisis.
Wow.
Because I was 21 years old, and I was like, shit, like how the hell am I going to be able to continue this?
Yeah.
I don't know if this is just a lasting moment. I don't know. I can't get a job after this. Everyone thinks I'm this person. And it created such I also started from a scarcity mindset. It created this really strange moment for me where it almost like exacerbated that scarcity mindset. I was afraid to tell friends, family, and it felt very lonely. It's really interesting. How would you say people started to treat you differently during this time? You mentioned it sounds like obviously the things you were doing in nightclub were pretty successful. You bought a boat, took 5 years to do that with Four Loko. How did you notice others treating you differently or even seeing you as a different person during that time period?
Well, I mean, there was a time where, since we struggled for multiple years, where people kind of, friends that were in corporate jobs that had very, normal lives, so to speak, and were making good money, so to speak, would probably look at me and say, like, he's a bit crazy. What is he doing? Why is he wasting his time? I specifically remember somebody saying, like, why are you going to waste your time on this? Go do something else. And when Four Loko really started to hit before the mainstream press hit, like the company was on a meteoric rise before anyone in that sense knew about it. No one treated me different because they didn't know. Especially because Chicago, where I was living at that time, was not one of our best markets. And suddenly this mainstream media storm hits, most of it negative, but still, like, we're on the news every night. We're on every late night talk show, culminates in the Saturday Night Live skit. And then people, like, suddenly were really treating me different in a weird way. It made me feel weird, and it made me feel a little bit guarded. I never had to question anybody's motive around me, but you start to think that. In a positive way, it gave me a lot of confidence. It felt like I could do no wrong. Anything I created was going to be a massive success, but it did create a unique situation that I had never experienced before and really didn't know how to navigate.
So would you say you kind of embraced those people who wanted to now be your friend or come into your life, or maybe gave you you said it gave you a sense of confidence? Did that allow any kind of like bad behaviors to perpetuate? Because I found that with myself. So, and, I find it even in other industries as well, especially when you have a lot of success at a young age. It's almost like you can do whatever, treat people however they want to be in your life, no matter what, because of what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't think it was that pronounced, at least when I'm thinking about it. It was people that I already knew treating me a little bit differently. I was so heads down in the business that I don't think I even left space for like all these new people to be to have that opportunity. I mean, look, we were in our late 20s at that time. So I was, at least I think all of us were pretty active, in social lives. And so in those settings, when somebody would find out that we had started Four Loko, or that I had specifically, you would get a lot of like, awe and wonder, and kind of like we just want to be around you because of that. But it has a weird feeling to it. I'm sure you can relate, as opposed to like, I really enjoy now not telling people anything I've ever done. And because I don't want to define a relationship based on that. And it's actually, my wife and I talk a lot about it. It's actually really amazing when you become friends authentically with somebody and then they learn about your accomplishments, because that had nothing to do with it, right? And did it facilitate bad behavior? Yeah. I mean, I was in a bit of an identity crisis in general, though. If I think back and I'm honest with myself, like coming out of college and essentially kind of being the man, to going to a new town, a city, trying to establish myself, to going, I was the guy with money, with all the connections in Columbus. I moved to Chicago. I'm essentially a nobody, and I have no money. So much so that at one point I had to borrow money from my now wife, but girlfriend at the time, to pay rent. That's a really dramatic shift within, a couple of years. And so I was in the midst of an identity crisis. Now I was back in this position of like kind of being the man in a sense, which felt familiar, but was a little bit different. And I also wasn't sure who I was or wanted to be in many ways, in business, but also in life. Like I had this longtime girlfriend, then wife at that point, but there's a lot of draw to the single lifestyle, especially now with like all this, all these accolades or, interest from people. And so there was a bit of an existential crisis that I probably didn't identify at the time, but looking back, and
how do you think you dealt with that existential crisis?
Well, unfortunately, very bad. I made a lot of stupid decisions.
And this was while you were now on the come up once again.
Yeah. So this is
once you regain the success.
Let's put timelines to it. So we start Fusion Projects in 2005. 2010 is when it really hits mainstream media, like massive awareness and attention and excitement. So 2011. But I would say from 2008 to 2012, where it seemed we could do no wrong, I felt like I had permission to do whatever I wanted. And that made me make some bad decisions. One of which I talk about in my book, is like, I was faithful to my wife. And, I had this like entitled mentality of like, well, it's not like I have an entire relationship going on the side. I traveled for work and I was somewhere and whatever. Right. And, now looking at it, I'm like, that is completely wrong and bullshit. But that was who I was at that time. And it really led me into a dark place, because I was competing. One of my partners was single. So I found myself competing on things that actually weren't even relevant. Like, who does the girl like? Well, I'm married at this point. Why does it even matter, right? Or who's getting more credit for being the person that started Four Loko? And so it took me to a weird, dark place that I wasn't really sure how to get out of.
It's interesting. It sounds like a lot of it, I think the ego is affected in such different ways, going from highs to lows to highs again. And it's incorporated into so many different things in your life. Like you mentioned, and even bad cases, even when you're having success, the ego is ballooning, where you're competing with friends for things that don't matter. But it leads me to my next question. I'm curious. And part of the entrepreneurial journey is we make sacrifices, and that kind of, you mentioned, goes along with it. A sacrifice, you said, that wasn't really a sacrifice, that we're thinking about it differently. So which sacrifices did you make along the way, especially in the early days? And which sacrifices would you say, looking back, were not worth making?
Yeah, in the early days, so I had a.
It could have even been along the way too. Even as the business gets bigger, you continuously have to make sacrifice. Even today, right?
Yeah, I have a probably different starting point than many, because of where I grew up, which was also like a crime-ridden town, and I was no stranger to being around illegal activities. I had this mentality of like, if I could get $1 million and have to go to jail for a couple years, but come out and have it, would I do it? And my answer was always yes. And so,
That's an interesting way of,
it's crazy, right?
yeah.
But in that context, like nothing was really a sacrifice because I wasn't in jail, right? So like that was the most extreme example I could bring myself to. I will say like, if I'm more practical about it, I sacrificed a normal, quote unquote, normal like life in my 20s. People were going to holiday parties, people had social circles in a new city from work. I didn't have any of that. It was a bit isolating. But I would do that again. So that wasn't a sacrifice I wouldn't make. What I wouldn't make is being so sharp elbowed that I was willing to put everything else at risk to accomplish success. Because my mentality at that time was, this is my opportunity. I have to make it work no matter what. It's a win-lose scenario, and everything else is any collateral damage is worth it. And looking back and where I am now, I realize like there are win-win situations probably more often than not, right? And you don't have to have collateral damage with things. I remember the first person that quit Fusion Projects. I was like appalled, offended, took it personal, like, fuck you, like we will never, I won't even talk to you, right? And contrast that with recently I had somebody leave Koya and talk to him the next day, and it was very adult-like. Like, you're an adult, you have to make your own decisions. This could impact me, that's okay. And it's a more long-term approach, right? You never know where your paths may cross. So I would say that's a sacrifice probably that I wouldn't make, putting personal relationships at risk.
And how about in terms of like, you touched upon it, the relationship component. How did being unfaithful in that aspect bleed into how you were carrying yourself day to day then, versus kind of like, now obviously you guys are, you've had a lot of self-discovery, no longer doing that. How would you say just the mental state of that was compared to today in the relationship dynamic?
Well, I would say that it is very freeing to be completely honest with somebody, which I had never done before in my life. And so when it wasn't some situation where I was like caught or had to come clean for anything I had ever done. It was just my wife and I's relationship was evolving, and there was a moment where we were having very candid conversations about a lot of things, and I felt like it was the time to come clean, and we worked through it. And it wasn't fun, and it was very hard, and it gave me a realization of like the impact I have on other people, which I probably never appreciated prior to that. Like, my actions do impact other people. From her view, like, her sense of reality was just shattered. So like, what else is not true, right? So the question was, how do I carry myself? I think it's much easier to carry yourself with a completely like aligned and clean conscience, even though I didn't think that bled into it. But like, there's nothing I have to hide. I don't have to make up any story. I can be who I am and be accepted for that, and it was very freeing. So I would say I would carry myself in an inauthentic way before, maybe manipulative, maybe trying to like understand the dynamic with somebody, like what they like, so I get along with them. And now I get to kind of be who I am. It's still always a struggle, right? It's never perfect, but like, get to be who I am, and people may like that or they may not.
Yeah. Something I definitely resonate with is just like, especially people who don't understand yet, and you touched upon it, is just once you're able to align with yourself, that is freedom.
Yeah.
And when you're doing all these things that are ego driven, that is not who you are.
Right.
And that's a lot of the stuff we'll get into. But so you touched upon a lot of lows along the relationship dynamic, and obviously Four Loko had a bunch of issues, especially when the regulatory stuff started happening, which was maybe it's interesting because I have my own relationship to that with Ramapo College. Kind of was the catalyst for all that stuff, right?
It was a huge part of it. Yeah.
It was a huge catalyst. That was the year before I went to, I was there, but I vividly remember like that. Apparently like the SWAT team came to campus and stuff. I don't know.
There were all kinds of crazy stories.
Great, weird stories. So you experience a lot of lows, as many entrepreneurs do, not just in business, but personal as well. Of all of those that you think about looking back, what was the lowest for you?
Well, I also now understand how to reframe things, which we've talked about a lot. And I look at anything that I might consider a low in the past and really look at it as like a learning opportunity and a pivotal moment. So, but I would say probably the lowest moment I can remember or period I can remember is when I was, and this was post all the hype and government regulation on Four Loko. So, and we had stabilized the company, but I was in this partnership with these guys that used to be my best friends. I was the best man at one of their wedding. The other one I was good friends with, but like, and it was totally contentious. And I wasn't sure if I was doing it. I know I had a part in it, right? Or I felt like it was more of them doing it, whatever, right? You're questioning it. I didn't want to be there anymore, but I didn't have a way out. And so I felt trapped. And I also was a new dad at the time. And so I'm figuring out being married, I'm figuring out how to be a dad, I'm trapped and miserable in this company. And, you know, when you spend that much of your time and life on something and you're miserable in that, you're kind of miserable in everything. So part of the reason we do what we do and start companies is because you have flexibility, freedom, you can make decisions, right? I felt I couldn't do any of that and I didn't have any of that. So that was probably the lowest moment. And I don't even know that I realized it was that low or that long until my wife looked at me one day and told me, you haven't been yourself in 2 years. That's a long time. And, I was kind of oblivious to it.
Did as we we'll touch upon this later on, but did the self-discovery journey start at that point yet? Had you been, I know you invest a lot now into just self-growth and awareness.
Yeah.
How, like, did you have that awareness yet at that point, do you think, or?
A little bit. When I think about life, I realize there's a lot of times that these, like, you can call it God talking to you, you can call it intuition, you can call it whatever you want, but these moments where things just pop into your head, and I had those. I've had those a lot, and maybe not realizing what they were at the moment. And I remember meeting up with this friend in Chicago, and the last person I at that time would have expected to be on this like awareness, personal growth, conscious journey, unrightfully so. Like, it's not his personality. He's just a big guy who played football. Like, it just didn't fit the stereotype that I had of someone like you would think of, at least I would have at that time, like some hippie guy, that's on this personal growth journey. Anyways, I was talking to him and he started using some language that was really foreign to me, and it just threw me off. Like, he said, let me think on that, or like, it's not a whole body yes, I'm going to say no to that, or these things that were just like intriguing to me. And instead of, which I may have done in college, be like, what the fuck's up with him? He's weird. I was intrigued by it and started talking to him, and he told me about how his company had this conscious leadership coach, and, they worked on how you show up to people, and how you get to know yourself better. And not long after that, he must have sensed I was intrigued, because not long after that, he called me and told me there was this new group forming on conscious leadership on Jim Dethmer's work, and he invited me to join it. And so I went and started doing that. And I would say that was probably one of the first steps into personal growth.
Would you say that was like the catalyst for getting into this personal growth journey?
I don't know, but it was one of the steps along the way. I would also say probably.
But it is also that's pretty crazy that, like, going full circle, that was the catalyst. And like we mentioned, I ended up forming a relationship with Jim Detmer. Yeah, that's pretty wild. I didn't realize that played that big of a part.
It was definitely
in your journey.
It was a really big part. And it was like a tangible thing, but there were other things, if I think about it, like I never realized I was really stressed. And I always consider myself like a wartime CEO. Like, I grew up able to handle a lot of stressful situations because I was in them. And so I just navigated it, right? Never paid attention to it. But at one point I realized I was really, really stressed. And it just dawned on me one day, like, close your eyes and sit still. And I meditated for the first time, and I had no clue or foundation of what meditation was, how you were supposed to do it, anything like that. But I think it probably saved me from a panic attack during the time of fusion. If I think even further back, and I'm shooting from the hip a bit here, but if I think even further back, when I was in college in Ohio, so not like, LA or something, I went into a gym and there was a yoga class going on. And of course it was all girls, which, this was the time where back and buys and chest and tries and eating chicken breast, like you're just trying to get bulked up. But it intrigued me. And I was like, I grew up Catholic. Am I even allowed to do a yoga class? Like I thought it was like a religious thing or something. And I went and did it and I loved it. And I remember a buddy did it with me one time and he's like, man, you seem really into this. So these things that just like, they were pieces of the puzzle that I didn't realize were being put together. I think they started me along this journey and then a genuine curiosity. But those would be the things I would say started me along that.
How would you describe, because we're still just giving background before we get into a lot of this stuff. If someone were to meet, first self, quote unquote, Chris, how would they describe that person as compared, do you think, to today?
Well, one of the other things that I guess started me along a journey, which will help with the answer to this question is, in our company, we brought in an executive coach who did a disc profile. And when I read this thing, I was like baffled that it could know me by answering 100 questions or whatever. And when I was reading it, I mentioned one of the lines to my wife, which said like, you have an atomic bomb in your pocket in terms of your words, and the power is not pulling that out. And the comment that he made to me is like, you need to understand how impactful your words are to others. And that was, you only know what you know. You only know yourself, right? So I didn't realize that. And my wife was like, no shit, I've been trying to tell you that for however many years. So that was all kind of self-discovery. Anyways, that leads into how people would perceive me. I think most people would perceive me as like somebody who's always smiling, very friendly, outgoing person. Others might have described me or perceived me as cocky, arrogant. I definitely had a lot of confidence. So that may not be an inaccurate statement, but I was hot-headed and short-tempered and, didn't back down from much. And I would say those are all still true. It's just how much of things are dialed up or dialed back, right? Because they are still you. I remember meeting with a broker who we had used at Four Loko, and then in Koya, I met with him, and he made the comment like, boy, you're like a Zen version of your prior self. I would not call myself Zen. I don't think most people would, but I'm definitely more calm, thoughtful, level-headed, and probably like clear on my priorities than I would have been then.
One really interesting thing that you touched upon is that something that I think that being a leader is not necessarily innate. I think it's a skill like many other things. Mm-hmm. And similar to you, I've always been the leader in my adult life. I've always just, since I was 19 years old, I've been creating companies. Mm-hmm. So I've always just been the CEO, the leader, just who I am. But sometimes I forget that, at least on earlier on in my career, I forgot how other people perceive me as that leader. I'm just me. I'm just trying to survive every day. I'm just the wartime. I just am used to all this anxiety. And learning, just like you said, learning how to not outburst on people around you, I think has been one of the biggest things that I've tried to work on throughout my adult life. Something embedded in me as a child growing up. Loud Israeli family.
Yeah, I can relate.
So I think that a lot of people, and even continuously, like I'm kind of amazed how some people remind me at times how other people see me or describe me versus like how I see myself. Because it's two completely contrasting things.
Yeah, I mean, we only know ourselves.
And just like you mentioned, like you don't like people seeing you as the Four Loko guy, Koya guy, just Chris. Then
then
the
those
rest
can
comes.
be things, right? But that being your entire identity is a weird thing. It's really powerful to understand, and I still struggle with it to understand how people perceive you. Like for me, as an example, when my wife and I are arguing or she's upset or whatever, I'm always like, hey, tell me fuck you and punch me in the arm. And she's like, that's not how I process it. And I'm like, but I don't even know that I'm coming off that aggressive to you. I don't even realize it, right? Because our levels of different things are different. So when I would talk loud, or in her terms, yell, I would say this is just how my family talk. We're just passionate people. We talk with our hands, we talk fast, we talk loud. I'm not yelling at you. But for her, that was yelling, right? When I question something with the team, most of the time I'm genuinely questioning out of curiosity or just to understand, but they can share feedback that like, it feels like you don't trust me, or you're doubting me, or you're yelling at me. And so it's really powerful if you can understand and get that under control, I think.
Another interesting thing that I don't know if you can relate to this at all, but I found a big contrast of why I got started, which seems like is similar to you, and along my growth journey, the way you want people to see you is much different. So a big reason why I wanted to be so successful, because I had a huge chip on my shoulders, because I wanted the status and success, so people see me as the thing I do. I actually wanted that. The bigger my company is, I wanted to be like, oh yeah, that is the guy doing this. The association with the thing I was doing was actually something I strived for, and that pushed me and motivated me. The further along you get, I find that it's actually pretty depressing. Like even my 30th birthday, some people made a video, just like little testimonials. A friend of mine put it together, which was awesome. And a few people said like, words about me were just about the things I do, business. Oh, Dan, that's so successful. I'm like, this is horrible. Yeah. This is like, like people only see me for what I do. It's actually pretty depressing, because what you do is a distraction from who you actually are.
Sure.
And if you have those, the insecurities around that, or haven't discovered that, it's what you do is comfortable.
Yeah.
Can you relate to that at all? Like throughout your,
Yeah, I would say early on, with Four Loko, I definitely found a source of identity in that and validation in that. Like I had accomplished something, and I was someone that, came from here to there, and people could look at that and boost me up, right? But not understanding, most of the time, not understanding what that meant or what that took, or the sacrifices that were made, as you mentioned before. But when I woke up and got fired from my company, I was forced to face that, identity crisis, so to speak, of like, okay, if I'm no longer that person, then who am I and what do I do? And all those doubts seep in, like, okay, well, was I lucky on this? And am I not really able to build or create more? Like, was it the imposter syndrome we've talked about before? Like, all those things come to the surface, and then you really have to, I think that's when you really have to start doing some work and discovery.
And you were just thrown into that. I from what I remember, the you being fired by your close friends was a kind of surprise to you, waking up to that.
Yeah, it situation had gotten really contentious, and I felt trapped or held hostage. And so I guess I shouldn't have thought that it was going to be, that it was a total surprise. I should have seen something coming, because it had to come to a head. What I didn't see coming was, how it actually happened, which is I went down to a conference that we were all supposed to meet at. They never showed up. I went back to my room at the end of the night, and there was an email from our lawyer that fired me, removed me from the board, and shut down my email that night. And it felt very much like a betrayal, because I was like, well, we couldn't even have just sat, like at least have the, decency to sit face to face or talk on the phone. Like, in their defense, maybe they felt they couldn't do that. I don't know. But it was a sudden thing, rightfully or wrongfully so.
Yeah. And the kind of point trying to get at least for the context of this conversation, is how the loss of identity, did you find that in that moment right there? Like, shit, like, when did you start thinking of how are others going to perceive me and what I do, instead of just the situation in itself?
Well, I think
how did that journey look like?
Yeah, it happened pretty quick. I mean, my first emotion was relief, oddly
really?
enough. Yeah, I just,
wow.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
A very interesting thing. It was like, finally, right? Finally, this is over. And then anger set in, and you can make up all the stories and reasons to create that anger. And then you sit in reality, and it's like, okay, here's where I am, and what am I going to choose to do? And I actually remember thinking, because at the time I had enough money in the bank that I didn't have to rush to do anything. I was probably realized that I was not going to not do anything.
And
like
you were 35 at this?
35.
35, had
Yeah.
kids,
2
family.
kids, yeah, living in Chicago. And I kind of realized I wasn't going to do nothing. That just wasn't in the cards for me. I thought that would be detrimental both to me and to my family, right? And so then it's like, well, what am I going to do? And I chose to jump in and essentially work just as much as when I had a job. Melanie,
During the time where you had
where I had no job.
before Koya.
Before Koya.
How were you spending that time?
So every morning I would wake up, I would go down to Soho House. There was a new Soho House in Chicago. I would work out, and which was a great relief for me. I decided to stop drinking coffee, so limited caffeine. I was meditating every day, and then I would go down there and essentially like network. I would take meetings, and it was like taking the blinders off for the first time in almost 10 years, where I was so honed in on this one thing and this one company. Like I didn't really network. I never went to any events. To be honest, I don't even know that I appreciated what we had built, and just how unique and amazing it was. And so all of a sudden, I have all these people that have access to me, or I have access to, and we're meeting and talking about different companies and different ideas. And it was kind of liberating. It was like, I'm exploring right now. I went to an event, Summit Series. I think you've been to or know of. I went to that and found that pretty fascinating. I did things that were like not things I made time for. And that helped me along this one self-discovery, but also like discovery of what's next for me. Yeah, that's what I did.
What was your motivation behind, because you mentioned money wasn't an issue. You were a father, so you still want to provide for your family, and you didn't want to do nothing. But what specifically was the motivator there? Because I find that, especially for me, we both said, coming from a place of scarcity, money was the primary motivator for me, for all the businesses I've done. And when you remove the money as a motivator, I found myself with nothing behind that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So for me, I agree. Money, regardless of how much you have, money can still be the motivator. And there's degrees of what is enough, right? And so I had more money in the bank that I had ever had, but comparatively, which is a dangerous thing, but comparatively, it wasn't what a lot of other people had. And I didn't exit the company, right? We had done distribution. So I built up a nice base, but there was no urgency, but there was never this thought of like, I don't need to do anything again. So that was one.
So not having enough, what you thought, like you didn't hit your number yet.
I didn't hit my number yet. Yeah. And, that was one. Two was a sense to prove myself again. Okay. I could come up with all these, reasons or excuses why that wasn't enough. I didn't do it on my own. So maybe what part did other people have? What part did I really have to do with it? It wasn't as big as I want to build. We built a company that did hundreds of millions of revenue, but I wanted to build $1 billion. Like, I want to prove that I can do that. Like, I want to go prove that I can do it somewhere else. Like, but I think really those were to prove it to myself more than other people. And then of course I wanted the financial outcome at the end. That was still a motivator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that the proving to yourself more than anything, I think that's really powerful and interesting. What was the hardest part of the shift, would you say, during that time, going from especially a business that was quite big at that time to Koya, getting involved, at the early stages, getting scrappy again? I mean, the skill sets are much different. What you're doing, probably have to be a much bigger individual contributor than managing people. Yeah. How was that shift for you?
It was difficult.
Even on your ego, like, damn, I went from the big business getting thrown out.
Yeah.
Did you have, I guess like did you have the competitor in you just like driving you every day, or what was that?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the starting, the early days of Koya were actually refreshing to me, because I probably felt like I was a little bit out of my element as Fusion got bigger. And I remember thinking like, we're fighting more internal battles than we are external battles. And that was such a like mind-boggling thing to me. Like, we should be out in the market winning, and we're doing all this internal stuff and fighting all these internal battles. And I didn't feel like I was totally equipped or experienced to really manage people or lead people that well. Like, I think I'm charismatic and a natural leader in those ways, but like in terms of the experience and systems and things like that, I felt like self-conscious about if I was in the right place and should do that. So it was a bit of a relief to go back to like stage one, I'll say. I also had like some street cred, so to speak. Like, I was the Four Loko guy coming in to start this new thing. So it kind of felt good. I was like being boosted up, patted on the back, in this new industry. But personally, there was a weird transition where I didn't know how to respond. Like, suddenly all the people that I was around, because again, we had very similar friend groups. Me and one of the guys lived in the same city. The other one lived in Arizona. And anyone who knew those guys was suddenly like an enemy of mine in my mind. And looking back, I was like, that was really unfair, because most people probably just don't want to be in the middle of the shit, but I didn't know how to like differentiate. And so I was going through this personal struggle of like, what do I do? Before having been fired, Melanie and I had decided we were going to move and just get out of the city. It felt a little toxic for multiple reasons. And so but after being fired, we expedited that. We moved to San Diego. And so I'll say I probably retreated a bit from many things, from social settings, from close friends, making new close friends, right? Maintained a few of the old ones. But like really retreated and felt isolated, because I just didn't want to have any of those cross, pollinated conversations. And then I came to the realization, like, that's never, it's almost like if you have a child with a woman and then expect you're never going to have to and you guys divorced, you're never going to have to interact with that person again. You're always going to have to interact with that person. It's like, we're always going to be tied at the hip from this thing that we had created. And it probably took me until I moved to Miami to actually just accept that and be able to navigate that confidently.
That's really interesting. So I have a bunch of questions on that, but I want to stay on this kind of self-discovery phase still between the two. During this phase, what surprised you about yourself that you weren't previously aware of? Like, you mentioned that you were starting to see the world kind of in a new light because you were so heads down, discovering new things you liked, et cetera. What kind of surprised you about that? Or about yourself?
I think it surprised me that there were so many different ways to make money in businesses, I got one-tracked mind into what I knew or felt like I knew. And when I heard about these different businesses that were in different industries that could scale quickly or slower, or some that were lifestyle business, it was fascinating to me that there are so many different opportunities. It was also eye-opening to me, to the idea that I said earlier, like, I don't have to maximize or squeeze every ounce of juice out of every opportunity, because there's endless opportunities, right? I have a lot of different interests, right? So I like to be kind of a Renaissance man and like learn a little bit about this, learn a bit about that, which I think was, I didn't leave any space for at that time. The second was really that I could, that I and my family could like get along anywhere. Like, home was kind of wherever we were. And that's so cliche to say, but like, we grew up never moving. And so when we decided to move with children to San Diego, we were really worried about like, were we upsetting their life, and how is that going to be? And if we move around all the time, we always had this image that was a really negative thing, until we talked to some people who had moved around a lot and found it as the most amazing thing. And moving to a place where we knew no one and feeling like more complete than ever, it's like, we can, I by myself can be happy just on my own. And then two, as a family, like, us just being together wherever it is what creates the home. Those are all really interesting discoveries.
Yeah, no, I mean, especially going from, I guess, what you mentioned initially, going from selfish to so selfless, like having a family, putting your kids, before yourself, and that journey, I'd imagine is really, really powerful. How about the especially now, Koya is a huge business in its own right. You guys are doing over $100 million a year in revenue. How do you still have any insecurities surrounding that situation at Four Loko now that you're so far removed from it, time and everything else that goes into it?
Yeah, so I'll make a
Especially
correction.
because I think people still might see you as the Four Loko guy instead of the Koya.
Always,
right?
And I've accepted that forever that will be the case, and that's okay because I can be I don't have to be only the one thing. I will correct one thing. Where at Koya we're doing over 100 million in retail sales, but in our own revenue we haven't achieved that yet. That shouldn't be long. I always say that because I want to be authentic to what gets put out there. But yeah, I still find insecurities. I mean, look, I follow along. I get high level financials from the company, from Fusion. They're doing better than they've ever done, which is awesome. And I'm happy for them and I'm happy for me because I'm still an owner in it. But, that brings up like, well, is it better off without me? All these kind of things. But I can quickly get past those because I've been able to build another thing. And I think this thing will be just as successful, if not more. But I would say more of the insecurities are around. I'll give you an example. This just happened the other day. I was playing paddle. One of the guys that came to play paddle that I didn't know, I met. We start talking. We realized that we actually shared office space in the same building with Fusion and his company, and he knew one of my partners pretty well. And I immediately felt myself distance myself from him. And I probably made up a story that he must be good friends with him. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I don't know. And that for whatever reason, that would be a negative on me. And I had to think about that afterwards. And I was like, why is that a negative? It is what happened. Our partnership broke up. Like, he's not wrong. I'm not wrong. That's what happened. And why am I creating distance? And that's from insecurity, right? So it still creeps in, maybe in unexpected and different ways.
Do you think in that situation it's insecurity or more so shame surrounding that?
It could be shame. I mean,
especially because it seems like, like out of sight, out of mind, like people, like you moved to San Diego, like you mentioned, you wanted to be uninvolved, and it took you coming to Miami to kind of like seeing like you can't escape these people who might see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you think about that?
It could be. I mean, there was a time, and it wasn't that long, where I had a hard time saying the reality of the situation, which is I was fired from the company, from my partners, and kicked out essentially.
And like owning that.
Right? I would say like, oh, I would gloss over it in ways like, oh, I got, are we separated? Or, whatever made it sound less harsh or severe. But I've said for a long time, and I can own the fact that I was fired because I don't find fault in that on either side. But there that's an interesting point. There may be some unrealized shame that like when that comes up for this new person, there is a little bit of like, oh, does that make me lesser than the person that was able to fire me, right? Because I'm used to being the leader, much like you, that gets to call the shots. I know, interesting explanation. I haven't thought much about.
Do you think that, do you ever find yourself having imposter syndrome today? Especially now that, you prove to yourself that on your own, you can create another huge successful business. You've done it twice now in a massive way. Do you still find yourself having that at all in any? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all the time, like you hear of or know of other companies that have scaled faster or scaled bigger or, whatever. And it does bring me back to the realization that like comparison is the thief of happiness, as they say, but like, there's always going to be somebody that's richer, scaled faster, scaled bigger, but it doesn't mean it doesn't creep in. So I still find it all the time. And man, living in Miami makes it even harder. Somebody has a bigger house, a nicer car, a private jet, or whatever. Maybe that's why we moved here. So I have to face it head on.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, if it's what the whole podcast is about, second self. And Carl Jung kind of theorized that, there's 4 stages of life. The warrior stage, which is you're optimizing for success and materialistic items, all that stuff. I think to me, I had a conversation with someone today. A friend of theirs is over 70 years old, still stuck in that phase.
Yeah.
Billionaire.
Yeah.
Still comparing, still wants the next thing, still. So I think that it's not an age thing. I think a lot of people go through their entire lives not being able to realize that optimizing for just money or success is not happiness.
Yeah. That definitely makes sense. And I wonder again to this idea of like the volumes of them, maybe they all exist, but what gets turned up the most at times or turned down, because I don't think I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I'll ever not have that warrior side of me. It's just like, is that dominating or is that playing a backseat role? We've recently been having this discussion, we being my wife and I, about, the seasons of life and like focusing on what is important at that time and what is irreplaceable at that time. And I've talked about this with you before, but like, I have this realization that I have three amazing sons that are 12, 10, and 7. And there is a finite timeline to that, right? In 6 years, one of them will be gone, most likely. In 10 years or 12 years, all of them will be gone. So like for the next 10 years, that's the thing I can never get back. Like I'm confident now that I can go create more companies, create more revenue, create more wealth, whatever. That's the blessing of having done a second one. I'm confident in that now, but I can never get this back. And so that doesn't mean I turn off the warrior phase or mentality completely. It just means I tone it down. And right now I focus on some of these other things, and that can change day to day for me as well. But, we were talking about I still have an older car. I have a 2016 car. And I was like, oh, maybe I should get something new and cool. And then I thought about it and I was like, I should get something that works for our phase of life right now, which is we have 3 kids and my mom lives here and we always have people, around. I'll get the cool car that's not equipped for that sometime later, And so when I can do a good job of anchoring in where I'm at in life and then making my priorities match that, it's super helpful.
Yeah, I think it's always a battle, especially internally, especially like you mentioned. It's not like those stages go away. You can fluctuate between them. And even like, ego and all these other parts of self, it's like not like they just ever go away. Being able to have the awareness to know when things are happening, I think is the real superpower.
Absolutely.
But going to the next question. So just kind of touch upon a bit, but I think for most people, what you've been able, or where you're at today is a dream, money, success, family, kids. Like that's what safe to say most people want in life.
Yeah.
Where would you say you find your most happiness today?
I just mentioned this yesterday. I was like, I find so much joy in seeing the world through my kids' eyes. And because it's so innocent and pure and like filled with potential.
Wow.
And when I can step out of everything else and eliminate all the noise and listen, don't get me wrong. I have 3 very active, loud boys. It's chaos and sometimes very stressful, but I find when I can get them one-on-one and really see them and connect with them for who they are and see the world through their eyes, it's amazing. I was telling somebody the other day, my oldest son decided to play lacrosse and he's playing in Liberty City. And so he's getting the, cultural mix of Miami and watching him interact with kids that maybe he hasn't been around before, have different personalities and upbringings is amazing to me. And seeing how there's like no, of these biases and judgments that we develop as adults. They're just kids playing and that's amazing to me. And that's probably where I'm the happiest.
It's pretty powerful. I think especially, the thing about what you said is that it doesn't have anything to do with all the other, other things we've discussed, business, a lot, I think I tell everyone the most important things in life are relationships and health.
Yeah.
And it's the interesting thing about it is that, especially in this social media world, the gurus mention those are, especially the relationships are the things you should sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's almost like admired, from these online, guru types out there.
Yeah.
It's like, you should, just lock yourself in and ignore the world and who cares about this? But it's like, especially for you, further along the journey than I am and most, the most happiness, fulfillment comes from family. I think that's super powerful.
Yeah, and there's a time and a place for all of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, starting at
Totally.
the beginning of the conversation, like I would have done years in jail to have financial success when I came out. That's like shutting the world out in a sense.
Yeah.
And I don't, luckily I didn't have
to the nth degree.
Yeah,
that's like,
talk
talk about it's only me.
Yeah. So I think there's a time and a place for a lot of it, but this idea that all the journeys are the same or they're one-stop shop or there's a certain way to do it is so false. We have a friend who had major success, you know, later in life. And I look at him and I remind myself, like, I'm 46 years old. There are days when I can feel like, oh man, I'm older. Or I'm on the, you know, there's some of these entrepreneurs like you are doing stuff super young. And then I'm like, oh, but I look at him and like his didn't even start until later in life than me, you know? And so it's kind of refreshing to see like it all is what you make it, right?
Yeah.
You have choices all the way.
100%. And it's all the perspective you have on it.
Yeah.
Or the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
a combination of both. But going back to, especially because I think so many people, you know, money is such a top of mind thing, especially for people who are still striving to get it. How would you say that your relationship with it has evolved over time, especially with where you're at today, where it doesn't sound like it's any longer the primary motivator? What is your ambition today to keep going then, if that's not?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's still a big motivator, but I think for different reasons. So just having the number, I think, was the reason before, and now realizing what options that gives me and what the things I can do with it is what motivates me around it now. So like, you know, when we go take a vacation and we can go to an amazing place that, you know, we've never been, or I definitely didn't go as a kid growing up, or you know, those kind of things are what excite me about, you know, financial stability or making more money. It's just options and experiences, and experience is really the priority. So I'm always fascinated by Miami. My perception of it is, you know, people choose what they want to spend their money on, and some people want to spend their money on an amazing exotic car, but they're living in a 1-bedroom rented apartment, and that's okay if that's what you choose, right? So it's always just what are you choosing to spend your money on, and I think the more money you have, the more options you have.
Yeah, I actually had a I think today about this. Something I really realized is it's not only the more options you have, but it's almost, I find, without purpose. The more money you have, actually, if you don't have purpose, the more likelihood you have of being depressed, because it almost moves you further away from people. It gives you more loneliness, less people to relate to, and more importantly, you are what you perceive as what society is the end goal.
Yeah.
And if you still aren't there, it's a weird, very weird dynamic.
That's really interesting. So the idea of this is what it's supposed to be all about.
Exactly.
Yet when I'm here, I don't have all that is making me happy. Yeah.
And that's a depressing feeling.
Yeah.
Because it's like, where else can I go?
What else do I do?
What else do I do?
Yeah, exactly. I do feel like I had this realization as well. I was making some important decisions about the next steps and in my life, and I had that realization of like all these things that maybe I could say I don't have, but many of the things that I do have are things that right or wrong, and it shouldn't matter what other people want, but that everyone else wants. I have an amazing I have an amazing wife with an amazing relationship with her. I have 3 amazing sons. I have, like, you know, we live in an amazing city. I have an amazing network. Like, all of those things are so much more important collectively, especially, but even individually, than just the one of cash.
Outside of family, which you've touched upon, where do you find fulfillment out of today?
You know, we talked about this before, but I've always struggled with like hobbies. So there's nothing really that is like I'm so passionate about, but I enjoy anything that I can like connect with people. That's probably one of the reasons I've enjoyed paddle in the city, is like it's just a reason to go hang out with people, right? And it's not like it used to be where to get together you were going to the bar to have drinks. Like, it's a healthy way to do it. I find a lot of passion in this is probably a newer thing for me, but finding a lot of passion in watching the younger people on my team really grow. And I didn't have patience for that before. You know, I was, especially in starting Koya, I was like, all right, how do we fast track this? I'm going to adopt the mentality of like, let's get the people who have been there and done that. And those are obviously usually a little bit older. And as we made some team changes in the past, some of the junior people really stepped up, and I'm like so happy and amazed and excited for them. So there's probably passion around coaching people up and bringing them along their journey. You have a business partner in a separate business, commercial real estate company, who I've been friends with since college. And, you know, we all have our own limiting mindsets, and he had his own, and it's always so easy to see in other people and not in ourselves, right? But I told him when he asked to start the business, I said, I don't have much bandwidth, and I don't have any experience in this, but I believe in you and I'd love to do it with you. I just want to feel like we're coming in on, the right expectations from a partnership, especially considering the prior one with friends. And anyways, I had this moment, I said it to Melanie, where I was like, I'm so happy that we can help him achieve his dreams and goals and financial stability and independence for him and his family. And I was surprised at how much joy I found in that.
That's awesome. I can definitely relate to that. In fact, being able to, for me, the ability to impact others through my own experiences is something I find a lot of fulfillment out of. It's a big reason why even, the podcast was something I wanted to do. Because, you can reach people in just a broader way through just conversations. There's definitely been a number of conversations in my life that have directly impacted my entire life.
Yeah.
Have there been any people for you that have kind of acted as that mentor that have had a big impact in your life?
I don't know
And
that.
how so?
I don't know that I'd say a person acting as a mentor, but there have definitely been moments and conversations that have changed the course of my life. I remember talking to one guy who was in that camp of like friends with one of my partners, and therefore I had always kind of naturally put a barrier between us. And I remember him recognizing that and saying like, hey, just because I'm friends with so-and-so doesn't mean I can't be friends with you, which I appreciated, gave me a good perspective. But he was also somebody who had been fired from his company. And I said, well, what did you do? And he was the one who led me to an ayahuasca journey. I had never even heard of it before that. The other guy who I mentioned who led me to the conscious leadership, course, the guy who I reached out to, who had created billions of dollars worth of brands in the alcohol space, who told me he was not equipped to run the company when he got tapped to do it. And he used this one business coach. And I would say that business coach changed, the trajectory of my life. So there are moments, like they're almost like, God sense for the moment.
100%.
It's like exactly what you needed at that moment. And that person may not even be in your life after that moment.
Just those conversations.
Yeah.
I believe that everyone has these. It's just, the ability to act on them.
Yeah.
Allows people to either be, successful, to be the person they want, all these things. I can very much relate to that. But on the topic of ayahuasca, because it's something I'm interested in, a lot of other people are, I would love to know more about that, but what age, where along in your, call it self-discovery journey when you first did that?
Well, so I had done yoga, the stuff I talked about earlier, yoga, meditation, conscious leadership. Those were the things I had done. And in fairness, I had also experimented with psychedelic drugs recreationally. So it wasn't totally foreign to me. But when I was exposed to it, this sounded very intense. And so it was a different ballgame. This would have been, within a year after being fired from the company, where I was really searching for like all the things you mentioned. What is meaning? Who am I now if I'm not the Four Loko guy? All those kind of things. And the interesting thing for me about that was, yes, the process itself of drinking the medicine and having the ceremony and all that, but the lead up to it, because I did it with a group. It's actually kind of fascinating to me thinking back on it, how I ended up agreeing to do it or wanting to do it. Part of it was a draw because it was an exclusive group. It was supposed to be 10 entrepreneurs from around the world. You had to be asked to do it. And ego-wise, I'm like, oh, I get to be one of the people that got asked to do it. So that was intriguing to me. Whatever got me there, it was fine. And the setup, there was a lot of like pre-work, group calls, watch this documentary, read that. You have to do this specific diet, the dieta, which was not only food, but it was like what you consumed, what you allowed into your mind. No sex for 2 weeks leading up to it. Like it was all this like very structured kind of like ceremonial stuff, which I think enhanced it, because when I got there, I realized some people show up and they go to dinner that night and they're like, oh, let's go do an ayahuasca ceremony. I just don't think that's how you're going to get the most out of it. But, all that led me to it in a way where I knew what I was getting into, because, I had this question in my mind of like, if I do this, what if I come out and I lose my drive because of it? What if something that I process out of me was what was motivating me to be quote unquote successful, at least financially. And then another question that came up is like, Melanie and I watched one of the documentaries together, and bravely, she said to me one night, like, what if you come back from this thing not wanting to be married? It was a real question, right? It was a thought in my head too. And to her credit, she said, well, if that's what's meant to be, then that's what's meant to be. And that's pretty brave of her, and obviously showed who she was. But there's a lot that went into it to get me there.
So I have never done ayahuasca before, but for you, I can relate to a lot of the things you said. What were the biggest takeaways from that?
Well,
and how big of an impact do you think it had on advancing the self-discovery journey and continuing it and whatnot?
I'll start by saying one of the things we talked about, a week or so ago, is that I think you can get that same experience with or without, hallucinogenics. I just think it fast tracks it, right? The saying that I learned when I got there was like, this is like 10 years of therapy in 2 nights. But meditation and breath work and all these things, talk therapy, all these things, essentially I think work the same, just in different intensity levels. What did I get out of it? When I got there, I assumed it was all going to be around work, because it was right after I'd been fired. And so it was all around like processing partnership issues and work and what am I going to do next? And everything that came out of it had nothing to do with work. It was all personal, which I think my takeaway was, it's all personal anyways. Like, how you show up in the world is how you show up in work. They're not disconnected, right? There is no work you and personal life you, there's you. And so it made me see firsthand, like, because it is hallucinogenic, it made me see myself through other people's eyes. So when we talked about how do people receive you,
wow,
it was super powerful.
That's pretty crazy.
Not only see it, but feel it. Like, I viscerally felt like how Melanie felt when I said something, when I thought I was just talking loud, but I was yelling, in her eyes.
And that was visual. You could visually see it and feel it, like,
in your mind, see it and feel like, you've felt like that anxiety weight on your chest. Like,
wow.
I felt that, and probably deeper than I've ever felt anything. And then realizing the impact I have, realizing the power I have within myself, if I could just get out of my own way. Like, it was so impactful that, at this time in my life, we had 2 young children. So Maddox was less than a year old and Brooks was 3. And we were still living in Chicago. It was before I moved. And I was gone for almost 2 weeks with almost no connectivity. Like, they ask you not to have your cell phone. And that wasn't all for ayahuasca. We did a Machu Picchu trek afterwards. But so much so that I got home, and within 5 minutes of her picking me up at the airport, she said, I don't know what happened to you, but whenever you need to go back to Peru, like, go.
What?
It was immediately impactful. And
wow.
She said, you text me one night and I knew something was different about you. And so add to all that, like, she had the kids by herself for all that time. Someone broke into her house, water leaked. It was an intense time for her. And it was still so impactful that she said, whenever you need to do that.
Do you think that you've retained a lot of those learnings today that you did back then? Because that's been, over a decade now since the first experience?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, close to. Yeah. I think it was so impactful because it was the first thing I had done, that I think that all of these kind of self-exploration or growth things have backslide when you integrate back into your normal life and society. And we do things to try to maintain them, new habits and rituals. But I do think there's usually a backslide. But I think it foundationally changed me. And some things went back, but like the foundation was definitely different.
That's really cool. And I know we both have done a lot of other modalities. We both done Hoffman therapy. I haven't done ayahuasca, but for you, you've obviously you've grown a lot in the last 2 decades. How do you continue to invest in your self-growth? So
I was trying to get in the habit of, so Melanie and I developed this ritual unintentionally, it just happened, but where we would take a day, maybe 2, maybe 3 if we can get away for it, and do like a quick trip right at the beginning of the new year, and essentially do like our annual board meeting for our families and ourselves. What's working, what's not, what do we like about each other, what do we not like that we're doing, start, stop, continue, and planning out for the year. And my intention at those was each year I'm going to do one thing that's personal growth oriented. it's not always like mental work. Sometimes it was like a physical challenge or whatever. This year has been very hectic, and so unfortunately we haven't been able to do that yet. So I don't know what my thing is this year, but I did Tony Robbins when I got down here. One of his whatever the first one is, I forget. Unleash the Power Within or something like that. So just something new and uncomfortable that I'm forced to go try. I force myself to, and I always find some value in it.
Do you think that you would have gone on this growth journey if it weren't for being fired from Four Loko? Like, it seems like that obviously was a very pivotal moment in your life. And the reason why I ask that, I think, is because a lot of people view failure differently.
Yeah.
You know, for me, I tell everyone I embrace failure because, or very early on in my life, I find that each time I fail, it hurts, sucks, but like I know those are the periods I should appreciate because I can maximize that almost to like spring forward myself. You know, the periods of growth in my life. It just got out of a breakup. I'm like, yeah, now I'm doing all the things that I know like I need to do to become a better person.
Yeah.
So I'm curious for you if you didn't have that. Easy to look back, but like, do you think that you would have gone on this journey if it weren't for that?
Yeah. So I think the journey started before the official breakup or firing from Four Loko. So I do think I would have gone on that journey. I think there were a lot of things I had to deal with in childhood that, you know, my mother struggled with addiction, divorce, just lots of stuff like that I think had me curious about, you know, self-improvement from day one for some reason, or personal growth. That definitely accelerated it. It made it much more, just like ayahuasca versus meditation, it made it much more intense and in my face, right? It's like, now you're faced with this existential situation. Who are you? You better go figure it out. And I think maybe around that time, I became familiar with the concept and adopted the mentality that like successful life is not about comfort, it's about growth. And I think a lot of people I know, they live a very comfortable life, and not even to the magnitude that we're talking about with money and cushy things and stuff. Just comfort means they work their 9 to 5, they go home and watch TV, they rinse, wash, and repeat, and on the weekends they go to a lake house or something. And that's fine for people who are truly happy. But I knew that I was not going to be happy in that. And when you can flip that to comfort is not the goal, then all the quote unquote failures aren't really failures. They're just growth opportunities. And I don't even know how I would define failure right now. I mean, there are certain things I could clearly define as failures, but in the sense of like business setbacks, like I truly believe now that they're all just growth opportunities. And since I set out to grow, growth isn't easy. And so that's just the path I chose and charted.
Yeah. No, super interesting. The one question I wonder, especially now, you know, you're a lot further down. Once again, I've mentioned it a few times, but in the event, you know, you go through almost final, you know, third version of uncertainty in a world where Koya sells, you don't have that anymore. I wonder if you find yourself thinking about that and maybe the feelings surrounding that. Are you scared of the uncertainty? You know, really interesting. Have you ever seen the movie There Will Be Blood?
No.
Really? One of my favorite movies ever. But there's like I rewatched it again and I saw something from it, a great quote from it. The main character, Daniel Day-Lewis, his name is Daniel Plainview, I believe. And he was like an oil tycoon. The guy asked him, you know, I can make you a millionaire in 2 minutes. And he responds, if I, you know, all the money doesn't matter, what else would I do with my life? And I find it's those periods of like not having, you have a family, but, you know, you still get fulfillment out of other things as well. I wonder if that scares you at all, thinking about that future.
So it's interesting. I've thought about some of the things like, that pertain to this, right? So, you know, we all are in industries that have an entire industry around it, right? You might go to a conference and you see, and I've thought to myself, I don't want to be the old guy at the conference coming back to the same conference, trying to run the same playbook, doing the same thing. And like a lot of people have a lot of success doing that. So I'm not negating it or saying it's not the right route for a certain metric, meaning maybe more financial success. But for me, I'm like, I don't want to be that guy. Like, I've been coming to this conference for 20 years. Like, that feels like hell to me, you know?
I do know.
Yeah. The other part of it is there are things that I have like interest in and passion around that I don't feel like I have bandwidth to explore right now. I'll give you an example. One of them, like my mom opened a sober living house here in Miami. And so the idea of like helping people that struggle with addiction in some certain way has always been interesting to me because we face that battle. The idea of like we try to live very holistically and organically. The idea of like regenerative farming and like having a ranch.
It's super
and,
cool.
Right. There's like, and now you're seeing these communities pop up around them and these tourist things pop up around them. And I'm like, oh, that would be fun to go explore. So I feel like there's probably more things than I can actually dig into. Now I also know myself, like they may seem fun. And then when you just like any business, you dig in all the shit and you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. But I feel like if or when I have the financial or total stability that I feel comfortable with, the question is, how do I make the bar not keep moving? That those would be things that I would explore, dig into, and find interest in.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it all goes back to a lot of the things we've been discussing, but primarily just alignment with yourself.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
Once you are, that can give you the idea of what you want to do next.
Yeah.
And maybe uncertainty isn't as scary.
Yeah, and not running somebody else's race about what I should do because that's what they did.
For someone struggling to move on from their old identity, how would you give them advice? Maybe someone who hasn't gone on this self-discovery journey yet. Like, where would you start? Where would you recommend?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that worked for me is like just getting some time and space, because for me, like living in the same, going to the same spot, doing the same routine as I was doing when I felt stuck, like just kept me stuck. So just something as simple as like traveling somewhere for a week or a day, right? Just shaking up that habit, I think can help like give a fresh set of eyes to the world. Like it's a catalyst, right? Not suggesting you should run from your problems, but meaning you maybe get a fresh set of eyes and can start to see things a little bit differently. And time and space also pertains to mentally, like however you accomplish that, whether it's quiet walks or meditation or whatever. But I feel like the older I get and the more experienced I get, the more fascinated by the idea and fact that like the answers are actually all within us, and we just have to shut up and listen or give ourselves enough silence to get them. This is diverting a little bit, but I think it's interesting. I had a friend who shared a book on social media. It was called, I think it's called Living Fearlessly. And it just seemed like an interesting title. And he had posted about it, said he liked the book. I had no context. I bought it. It's actually a religious book. It's a Christian book, which I may or may not have bought had I known that. But I found it really interesting because what it talks about is like, we pray wrong. And because what we ultimately do when we pray is we like beg. We like, forgive me for this, let me have that, whatever. And they're like, the proper way as described by the Bible to pray is have a conversation. And I tried this and I found it fascinating because the first thing you do is doubt where the answers are coming from. Oh, is that just me saying it? But it doesn't really matter. It's like whether you're talking to yourself or whether you say you're talking to God, if you give yourself space and time and ask the questions and listen, I think you can get the answers. Now, whether you want to, they might not be the ones you want to hear. So whether you actually want to take that advice and do it is a different story, but maybe trying something like that.
There's a book called Conversations with God, which is, have you read that?
No, Melanie's talked about it though.
It's literally like a conversation with God, like Q&A going back and forth. And they touch upon a lot of this stuff. It's really interesting. But something you said definitely resonated with me about finding answers within, because we talk about patterns, especially we learn all this stuff. One of my biggest faults is that I like to say crowdsource opinions, crowdsource advice. I like to ask, especially when something's going wrong, instead of going internally, I ask everyone, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And I always, the stories we tell ourselves, I always told myself that was a good trait to have. So I'm like, I can see what everyone thinks and make a decision from it. But then you're just, I'm like, I can find patterns, but like none of that is me. None of that is what I think. None of that is aligns with myself.
Yeah.
And if you continue down that path, you just end up doing things that don't align with yourself, that lead you to not be happy.
That other people thought
That other people are probably projecting their own selves at you.
There's a flip side to that, though. They popped into my mind. Are you actually looking for the answer, or are you using that as an opportunity to connect with people? Yeah.
Using to connect with people, also maybe as an opportunity to validate what I want them to say.
Yeah.
Maybe a combination.
Sure.
But the biggest, we both have done Hoffman, which has been pivotal for me. And after it, it's almost like, now I'm trying to go back to the middle, but it's almost like now I'm like scared to ask people what they think, because I want to do things that align with myself and get those answers internally. And then, I find myself too isolated. And I find, the thing is it's nice. It feels good to have an outlet to vent.
Yeah.
You don't always need people to tell you what to do.
Exactly. I mean, and women are so much better than us at certain things. Like, I remember Melanie's friend was struggling with something at one point, and she was observing another one of their friends tell her what to do, constantly tell her what to do. And Melanie decided to approach it different, and she talked to her friend, and she said, like, I know you know what to do. I trust that you can figure this out. Essentially, inviting confidence into her, but I'm here to listen, and I'm here to talk to you about it, but I'm not going to tell you what to do because you know what to do. And I thought that was such an interesting approach that, we could probably all work on a little bit, because I like to have people to talk about too. And I'm not really looking for their advice.
Just communicating your boundaries,
Yeah.
Has taken me a long time. And even a lot of the words you said, I think it's like, sometimes people hear words, but unless you can really relate to it on a deeper level, how you experience those words are much different.
For sure.
So that's another interesting thing. But wrapping this down now, just a few final questions, and for people out there, I think can maybe get some value out. Question: what is a belief that you've had before that you've completely changed your mind about? I think that, once again, it's like I find value in breaking people's misconceptions about how the world is. I think we've done that on the last hour and a half.
Yeah.
But what do you how do you think about that when that comes to mind?
I mean, I the one I think of is that there is a winner and a loser, and that used to be my mentality, is like you win or you lose. And now I think there are plenty of win-win scenarios. Even in the quote unquote failures, you can win.
How about a misconception people get wrong about life as an entrepreneur?
That you have so much time and it's so easy because you get to create your own schedule. And I actually find that most of us, if not all of us, are harder on ourselves than any boss could ever be. So when you sign up for the entrepreneurial, journey, you're signing up for a lot of hard work that's self-imposed.
Yeah. Whoever created the phrase, I want to be an entrepreneur because I don't want to work a 9 to 5 is the stupidest.
Because now you get to work at a 9 to 8.
Yeah, you get to work 9 to 8 and most of the time make way less money.
Yeah, exactly. And take a ton of risk.
And have a lot more, it's that's crazy to me. People still glorify that. How about we've gone through a lot about how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how people see you. What's a misconception still that you think people get wrong about you as a human? Especially when before they meet you.
Yeah, I think I heard this from one of the guys that I went to Peru with when I did ayahuasca, and he said externally, which I appreciated this feedback. He's like, externally, it can come off as if you have it all figured out and together. Because he's like, you said I just moved my family from Chicago to San Diego. I have 2 kids, and I didn't intentionally position it that way, but that was the way he received it. And, I think we're all human and we all are dealing with shit at all times. And when people look at those things first, they can forget that no matter who you are, you're dealing with something as well.
Totally. I think some of the experiences, Hoffman, ayahuasca, you fully appreciate that everyone in life is going through shit.
Yeah.
Everyone. Doesn't matter if you have it all. I'm sure, Mark Zuckerberg, Bezos, it seems like they have everything in the world. I'm sure they have plenty of issues.
Yeah, exactly.
Elon Musk certainly does.
Yeah.
Last question, and we can wrap it up. when you think about success, what does that mean to you today?
I think if I think of a successful life, I'll reframe it a little bit. I think of one where I was able to optimize my life for the season that it was in. So that I was able to really spend time and be a very important role in my kids' lives when they were in their formidable years. That I was able to create companies that created value not only to me, but to the rest of the world. That I was able to be a supportive husband and great partner for my wife. That I was maybe had an impact on people I didn't even know in ways I didn't even plan. I think that would be a successful life.
Awesome. Well, I hope that this hour and a half can impact someone listening.
Me too.
I think you dropped a ton of wisdom, ton of insight. I learned a lot. This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming. So we'll wrap it up now. And you just somewhat recently, put out a book, a Blackout Punch.
Yeah.
So I know you're also growing your personal brand as well to coincide with that. So if you want to let the listeners know where to find you on social.
Yeah, I'm somewhat active on LinkedIn. So Chris Hunter on LinkedIn. On Instagram, I'm Christopher Hunter, underscores at the beginning, underscores at the end. Obviously not that big into the personal branding aspect of that. And then, like you said, the book is available on Amazon.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's it.
Thanks,
Until
buddy.
next time.